For nearly 25 peaceful years, Samuel Carter and his wife, Evelyn, had lived quietly inside apartment 3A of Linden Heights, a modest brick building tucked into a calm corner of Atlanta where life moved gently, predictably, and with a kind of warmth that made every day feel like a blessing. Their home was small but full of soul, sunlight, spilled over lace curtains each morning, painting their walls in soft golden tones that made the framed photographs glow with a living history of love. Samuel's favorite chair sat beside the window, worn perfectly to the shape of his body after decades of early morning, coffee rituals and newspaper rustling. Evelyn's plants, African violets, lilies, basil, rosemary, few stubborn geraniums, lined the windowsills like old friends greeting the day. Their lives were simple and filled with purpose. Samuel had spent over 30 patient, disciplined years working for the United States Postal Service, waking before dawn, delivering mail in blistering heat and cold rain, never missing a shift, never raising his voice, never giving anyone a reason to doubt his character. Evelyn had spent 20 years volunteering at their church, teaching Sunday school, comforting families, and becoming a steady, nurturing presence in dozens of children's lives. They paid their bills early, kept their apartment clean, and never once caused trouble. Everything about their home radiated stability, gratitude, and a quiet kind of joy. And more than anything else, every inch of those walls held reminders of the boy they had saved, Marcus. Their adopted son, the child they took in when no one else wanted him, the child whose smile had become the brightest part of their lives. But the peace they had built with so much care began to crack the morning. Graham Whitford showed up at their door, young, smug, and wrapped in wealth he hadn't earned. He stood in the hallway wearing a tailored suit and an expression that carried the kind of icy contempt only privilege could produce. Without proper notice, without even pretending to offer respect, he forced his way inside for a so-called inspection. His eyes flicked across their home like a critic, examining a painting he had already decided he disliked. He checked behind furniture, opened cabinets, ran a finger across surfaces looking for dust, and walked through rooms with the shameless authority of someone who believed the elderly couple before him didn't deserve the space they lived in. When he noticed the water stain on the ceiling, a stain caused by a leak Samuel and Evelyn had reported to previous management 5 separate times, Whitford photographed it with the hungry satisfaction of a man who had finally found the weapon he needed. Samuel watched silently from his chair, gripping the armrests as anger pulsed through him, but he held his tongue out of habit, out of discipline, out of the lifelong practice of choosing dignity even when it wasn't offered. Evelyn stood near the kitchen door, wringing her hands, her chest tight with unease, as she watched a stranger violate the home she had lovingly tended for decades. Whitford said little before leaving, but the cold smirk on his face made it clear he wasn't done. He looked at them the way a person looks at objects, things he could remove, rearrange, or discard without consequence. Days later, when Samuel walked down to the lobby to collect their morning mail, the entire rhythm of his life shifted. His steps slowed as soon as he saw the crisp white envelope with Whitford Property Management stamped in raised gold lettering. A sick weight formed in his chest as he opened it, his fingers trembling before he even pulled out the paper inside. And there it was, a mere notice to vacate. 30 days. Fabricated accusations lined the page like daggers. Unauthorized occupants, tenant-caused damage, non-compliance with inspections. Lies. Clear, deliberate, weaponized lies. Samuel read the letter again and again, each repetition feeling like a punch he could neither block nor return. He had delivered mail to thousands of homes in his lifetime, carried millions of letters for people he never met. But this one letter, this one hateful, dishonest piece of paper, felt heavier than all the others combined. When he returned upstairs, Evelyn looked up from her stove, her smile fading instantly when she saw his trembling hands and the pale, devastated look on his face. She read the letter once, twice, then pressed her hand to her mouth as tears filled her eyes. Their sanctuary, their memories, the home where they had raised Marcus, celebrated holidays, comforted each other through storms. It was all being threatened by a man who saw them as obstacles, standing between him and more profit. The grief that filled the apartment that morning was quiet but suffocating, like smoke rising from a fire they could not yet see. Yet in the midst of their fear, there was one truth Whitford did not know, one piece of their story he could never have anticipated. The sweet boy whose picture hung on their refrigerator, the frightened foster child who once clung to Evelyn's hand like it was his last lifeline in the world, had grown into a brilliant, powerful man. Marcus Carter, their son, their pride, their miracle, was now a highly respected federal judge. With a reputation for fairness, integrity, and an unwavering commitment to justice, he had risen from nothing, built himself through grit and gratitude, and carried Samuel and Evelyn's teachings like armor. And now, without realizing it, Whitford had challenged the wrong family. Samuel and Evelyn didn't know it yet, but the single phone call Samuel would soon make, hesitant, heavy, and filled with decades of unspoken pride, would set in motion a chain of events that would shake the walls of Linden Heights and show Whitford a kind of justice he had never believed possible. The days after the eviction notice felt like a slow unraveling of everything Samuel and Evelyn Carter had built across a lifetime. The air inside Linden Heights shifted, becoming thick with tension, as if the building itself could sense the malice now targeting its most gentle residents. Graham Whitford seemed to take pleasure in tightening the screws around them. He roamed the hallways with that arrogant, showy confidence that only men who inherited power ever seemed to possess. Each time Samuel saw him, the younger man was dressed immaculately in expensive suits, clutching overpriced coffee cups or talking loudly about renovation plans and premium tenants. He walked with the smug assurance of someone who believed nobody could oppose him, certainly not an elderly couple he assumed had no influence, no allies, and no fight left inside them. His harassment started subtly enough that an outsider might mistake it for normal property management issues, but Samuel and Evelyn could see the pattern clearly. The accidental water shutoff that left Evelyn unable to cook or water her plants, the unannounced inspections performed by cold-faced contractors who rifled through their belongings like police officers, searching for contraband, the sudden notices about imaginary noise complaints from neighbors who later promised they had said no such thing. Every day brought a new twist of pressure, a new attempt to push them toward panic, exhaustion, or surrender. The cruelty escalated again on an afternoon the Carters would remember with painful clarity. Samuel and Evelyn were returning from their weekly grocery run, carrying bags filled with items they'd carefully budgeted for, when they stepped into the newly renovated lobby. Whitford stood in the center of it all, performing like a ringmaster before an audience. A wealthy young couple dressed in designer clothes, nodding as he described the future vision for the building. As soon as he spotted Samuel and Evelyn, he raised his voice dramatically, ensuring his words echoed through the expensive lighting he had just installed. "Some of the old tenants from the previous management are still here," he announced loudly, gesturing toward the Carters as though pointing to outdated furniture. "But don't worry, they'll be gone very soon. We're transitioning this building into a more refined demographic." The words sliced through Evelyn like a blade. Her face paled as humiliation rushed into her chest, and she lowered her head, wishing desperately to disappear. Samuel remained frozen for a moment, the grocery bags hanging from his hands as if they suddenly weighed 100 pounds. Whitford's smile widened in triumph, pleased with his own cruelty. The young couple, even in their privileged comfort, seemed uncomfortable, shifting awkwardly as they realized what they'd just witnessed. But Whitford didn't care. He relished the power. Evelyn hurried toward the elevator, her steps unsteady, her heart pounding with a kind of pain she hadn't felt in years. Samuel followed, but not before turning to look directly at Whitford, a look not of fear, but of a man storing every insult, every injustice, every moment of humiliation deep inside himself like fuel. That night, after the groceries were put away and Evelyn had retreated to their bedroom with a heaviness in her soul that Samuel could feel from across the apartment, Samuel sat alone in the dim glow of a small lamp. The apartment was quiet, but not with the comforting quiet they had always cherished. This was the quiet of dread, the quiet of a storm they didn't know how to stop. Spread before him on the kitchen table was the eviction notice, its bold letters burning into his mind like an accusation he knew was false. Beside it lay the stack of repair request copies they had submitted for years without response, proof of their truth, ignored by those in power. Samuel's tired eyes drifted upward to the refrigerator door where the most precious photograph in their home hung. Marcus, their son, dressed in deep navy graduation robes, smiling with a pride so bright it could rival the sun. Next to the picture was the yellowed newspaper clipping announcing Marcus as one of the youngest federal judges ever appointed in their district. Samuel stared at it for a long time, remembering the scared little boy they brought home decades ago, the boy who clung to Evelyn as if she were the first safe person he had ever met. Marcus had grown into a brilliant man with a fierce sense of justice and a heart shaped by the love Samuel and Evelyn poured into him. And now, as fear and grief twisted inside him, Samuel knew that he could no longer keep this battle from Marcus. Not out of pride, not out of fear of burdening him. With trembling hands, Samuel picked up the phone. The quiet apartment felt breathless as he dialed his son's number. Marcus answered on the second ring, his voice warm, steady, and immediately alert to something unspoken. Samuel tried to speak calmly, tried to reassure him, downplay what was happening, but Marcus heard the tension in every word. "Pop," he said softly, yet with unmistakable firmness. "What's going on?" And that simple question broke down the wall Samuel had been trying to hold up. He told Marcus everything. The inspections, the lies, the harassment, the humiliation in the lobby, Evelyn's tears. For a moment, the other end of the line was silent. But it wasn't the silence of shock. It was the deep, charged silence of a storm gathering its strength. And then Marcus spoke, his voice lower, more controlled, carrying the calm power of a man who understood both the law and the depths of love. "I'm coming," he said. "I don't care what's on my schedule. I'm clearing it. No one treats my parents like this. No one." Samuel felt relief wash over him, mixed with something like pride so overwhelming it almost made him cry. When he hung up, he looked again at Marcus's photograph, his son, his miracle, the boy he and Evelyn once rescued, and realized with sudden certainty that they were no longer facing Whitford alone. A force much stronger than greed was on its way to Linden Heights, and Whitford had no idea how quickly his false power was about to crumble. The next morning, Linden Heights felt different, as if the building itself sensed the shift in air before anyone saw it. Samuel and Evelyn woke early, exhaustion still clinging to their bones, but a fragile sense of hope flickered inside them for the first time in weeks. They moved through their morning routine quietly, each pretending not to notice how tense the other was. Samuel was sitting at the kitchen table, staring at his cup of coffee without drinking it, when a familiar knock sounded at the door, a knock that carried warmth instead of dread. When he opened it, Marcus Carter stood there, dressed not in the heavy robes of his courtroom, but in a simple dark suit that somehow felt even more intimidating. His eyes, usually soft when he visited home, now held a calm, controlled fury that made Samuel's breath catch. Marcus stepped inside without a word, embraced his father, then held Evelyn tightly as she began to cry into his shoulder. He whispered, "I'm here now, Mom. You don't have to be afraid anymore." And in that moment, the entire weight pressing on the Carters seemed to lighten, as if the presence of their son filled the apartment with a protective force stronger than any eviction notice, any insult, any lie. Marcus didn't waste a second. After sitting them down and hearing every detail, every notice, every insult, every fabricated accusation, he opened his briefcase and began reviewing the documents Samuel had saved. His movements were controlled, precise, and silent, except for the crisp turning of pages. When he finally looked up, the anger in his eyes was no longer just that of a son. It was the fury of a federal judge who recognized an abuse of power when he saw it. "Everything he's done is illegal," Marcus said, tapping the eviction notice with one finger. "This isn't just harassment. This is discrimination, intimidation, and falsification of documents. He thinks you're powerless. He thinks nobody will stand up for you." He paused, his jaw tightening. "He has no idea who he's dealing with." Samuel reached out to steady his son's hand, not wanting Marcus to carry too much anger. But Marcus gently squeezed back as if to say, "Let me handle this." Then, with a determination that filled the room like thunder rolling in from a distant storm, Marcus stood up, straightened his tie, and said, "I'm going to speak to him. Right now." The confrontation that followed would be retold by residents for years. Marcus walked into the lobby with the unwavering stride of a man who had spent a lifetime fighting his way through courtrooms, prejudice, and expectations. Graham Whitford was standing near the reception desk, complaining loudly on the phone about ungrateful old tenants and slowing down renovations, when he looked up and saw Marcus approaching. At first, Whitford smirked, assuming Marcus was just another resident coming to complain, another harmless obstacle he could push aside. But when Marcus introduced himself, stating his full name and title with razor-sharp clarity, Whitford's expression changed. His confidence faltered for the first time. Marcus spoke calmly, but with the unmistakable tone of authority. He exposed every lie, every violation of tenant law, every fabricated complaint, every illegal action Whitford had taken. Residents nearby stopped pretending to mind their business. They watched in stunned silence as Whitford's arrogance cracked piece by piece. Marcus pulled out printed copies of local tenant rights, legal citations, and the very repair requests Samuel had filed years ago. "You lied on official notices," Marcus stated plainly. "You falsified claims. You weaponized your position. And worst of all, you targeted my parents because you assumed they had no one to protect them." Each word hit Whitford like a chisel striking stone. His mouth opened to respond, but Marcus raised a hand. "I'm not done." Whitford fell silent like a scolded child. Then came the final blow. "I've already filed preliminary complaints with the Housing Board and the city's Legal Affairs Department. You will receive formal notice of investigation within 48 hours. You're done harassing them. You're done breaking the law. And if you try anything else, anything, I will personally see that you lose not only this building, but your entire management license." The lobby was so quiet that even the hum of the overhead lights seemed to fade. By the time Marcus returned to apartment 3A, the entire building was buzzing with whispers of what had just happened. Residents who had been too afraid to stand up to Whitford finally felt the fear lift from their shoulders. Some even peeked out of their doors to thank Marcus as he passed by. When he entered the apartment, Evelyn rushed to him, tears of relief streaming down her face. Samuel placed a hand on Marcus's back, pride shining through his tired eyes. Marcus pulled them both close and said softly, "You're safe now. He won't touch you again." And for the first time in weeks, Samuel and Evelyn finally believed it. They spent the evening together in the warm glow of their living room, laughing softly, sharing stories, remembering old times. The shadow Whitford cast over their lives had finally been broken, replaced by the powerful truth that family, real family, stands unshaken in the face of injustice. And in that moment, as Marcus sat between the two people who had given him hope when he had none, he knew that every success he'd ever achieved stemmed from the love that lived within those walls. The Carters had survived the storm, and the home they had built with faith, patience, and kindness would stand stronger than ever.